Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com, joining us now for the final time in the history of the world, if you believe all the things that you read. With us right now from Rattle and Hum Sports, the Big 12 insider, Kevin Lonnquist. Kevin, I hope you're having a great final day of the history of the world.
I'm partying with the Mayans.
And how do the Mayans party, by the way?
Actually, I don't know. It's really funny about how all this stuff has come about, because I think based on all these reports, I think there was like a meeting a couple weeks ago by all these scientists that were wringing their hands and saying this wasn't true and these things aren't adding up with the Mayans. And I think there were some descendants of the Mayans who actually said, no, that's not what we meant. And so...
Well, hey, it's a good thought.
But never let doom interfere with facts.
Exactly.
Facts interfere with doom thinking. So.
I'm all for fiction anytime you can enjoy it, so we'll play with it. All right, I know that you have pretty much wrapped up your Big 12 coverage of college football until we get to bowl season, and we will get to that in just a moment, but just now starting to kind of get into the round ball season. I just want your overall impressions of what you see with the Big 12 basketball conference so far.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I think the Big 12 hoops, it's pretty mediocre right now. Obviously, Kansas has got a pretty young team that Bill Self is trying to put together and mold. The Jayhawks will probably and should be I think they're going to be going for their 9th consecutive conference championship. They should be the team to beat once again in the conference. They've gotten excellent production out of Ben McLemore, the true freshman. He's averaging about 16 points a game, so that's been everything as advertised. Jeff Whippy in the middle has been as good as advertised as well. Travis Relaford, he's a known commodity, so he's done really well for them. But still, there's still some things about the Jayhawks that we need to find out a little bit, and we'll know a lot more about that tomorrow when they go to Ohio State. That'll be a big game for them, just to see where they're at. They picked up some decent wins over. Oregon State, Washington State, they've beaten St. Louis. They had a win over former Big 12 opponent Colorado, and the Buffalo seem to be kind of free-falling right now. And then after that, it kind of gets a little bit of a, I don't want to go of a, where are we at after Kansas? Because I think Oklahoma State's got a young, interesting team. They got 2 kids from Flower Mound Marcus and Philip Forte and Marcus Smart who are going to be really impacting players. We'll see how they respond when the Big 12 season gets going next month. But Oklahoma State's about 23-24 in the rankings. They're off to a pretty good start, and then after that, we just don't know. I mean, Kansas State, Iowa State, and Oklahoma have got some decent looking records, but they haven't really played anybody. And Oklahoma took a bad loss this week against Stephen F. Austin. Baylor's got an incredible backcourt led by Pierre Jackson, but they've got some really young post players led by Isaiah Austin. And Baylor's a hard team to figure out because they go to Rupp Arena on December 1st and win at Kentucky, which is like beating the Romans in Rome. And then they turn around 4 days later and come back to the Farrell Center and lose to Northwestern.
Yeah.
And so they're just really hard to see. I think TCU, Texas Tech, and West Virginia will really have long seasons. West Virginia can't shoot the ball. And then you got Texas with it learning that Mike Kabonko is pretty much out for the year. Reportedly, the reports are out there that he's been suspended for the rest of the season because of his dealings with an agent, and that really hurt them, especially. And unfortunately, it comes on the day that they picked up their signature win over an okay but not a vintage North Carolina team the other day. Mm-hmm. And then they have Michigan State, and then the Longhorns go to Michigan State tomorrow. Yeah, and so that's a really tough road. I just don't know what to make of Texas. I really thought that we've kind of maybe we're reaching the end of the Rick Barnes era, but then they turn around and pick up a nice win over North Carolina. I don't expect them to win at Michigan State tomorrow, but you never know. We'll just kind of see how they go. Their guard play is obviously going to be they've lived without Kabongo for the first month of the season anyway. Now they're just going to have to finish with the rest of the season. I think they're a real borderline NCAA team, though, in my opinion.
I'm with you, though. Rick Barnes seems like he's kind of running out of steam in Texas. It seems like he and Mac Brown both are just about seeing the last of their run there. Well,
I mean, if you look at them, it's been a great run, though, for them. I mean,
sure.
If you consider the fact that, Mac's been there 15, and I think Rick's been there 14 years. I think Rick got there the year after Mac got there. And so, really, in today's standards of college coaches, as transient as this industry is, whether it's be football or basketball, the fact that these guys have been there for that long a period of time is pretty incredible. So We'll just have to wait and see how this all plays out. I think if Texas doesn't make the tournament, which, again, remember they just barely got in last year. They've actually barely gotten in the last 2 years. I think there's going to be some questions as to whether or not, if Barnes wants to do it or if the Lost Odds wants to make a move there, because they're obviously not competing for conference championships right now.
Right. Okay, and I want to know your impressions on Larry Brown's start at SMU.
Well, it's obviously, it got everyone excited about when they jumped off to the 8-1 start, but the problem for the Mustangs is that they're really thin. You probably have 3 really solid players on that team in the transfer point guard and Nick Russell, who does a really good job. Ryan Emanuel, who's the other guard, he's a kid that's out of Houston who's been pretty much of a warrior for them. Jalen Jones, kid out of Dallas, Kimball, has been, a really strong player. And then after that, it gets a little bit interesting for the Mustangs. They've suffered back-to-back road losses at Rhode Island and at Utah. Those are games I figured that they might lose. So the fact that they're even 8-3 is a little bit of an interest, is better than what I think a lot of fans would have expected. They have some decent wins. I think from their standpoint, they've got a tournament that they start tonight out in San Francisco, the Cable Car Classic that Santa Clara hosts. Mm-hmm. And I think if they could split those, maybe come back to Dallas, because they'll have 2 more non-conference games before they start the Conference USA season. And I think if they can get 1-1 in this tournament up here, maybe split their next 2, which are home games against Furman and Wyoming. I think if you go into conference play, maybe 10-5, maybe you get a little bit of lift. I mean, obviously, they just don't have any depth, Brian. That's the problem. They bring only 1 kid off the bench, and that's London Giles. They don't have any low post presence. So things like that will kind of show up during the course of the season. You can kind of mask it for a while, but when everyone starts to figure out that you don't have any answers in the block, you're going to have a lot of problems. And I think that's what the Mustangs dealt with against Utah the other day. They obviously had problems against Rhode Island as far as defending the perimeter, because the Rams were just lights out from 3-point range. And plus the fact the Mustangs, who have a small margin for error anyway in that game against Rhode Island, they committed 22 turnovers. So they've got to take care of the basketball, and they've got to be sound every time to take the floor.
Big 12 insider Kevin Lonnquist on Rattle and Hum Sports on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM. All right, let's look at the college bowls. I'm going to hit some that aren't necessarily Big 12 bowls, but I know that you're watching these. For instance, the Sheridan Hawaii Bowl on the Christmas Eve. You got Fresno State taking on a 6-6 SMU team. Fresno State's a 12.5-point favorite. Is this a make or break for June Jones?
No, I don't think so.
You sound disappointed, by the way.
No, not at all. Actually, I think from the standpoint, I think if anything was going to happen with June, it would have happened in early December.
Okay.
And I think that, and to be honest with you, I think June understands what's going on here. They are decided underdogs in this game, of course. You got David Carr's little brother that's running that offense over there for Fresno State. They're a really good football team. They're very sound on both sides of the ball. You got former Texas A&M defensive coordinator Tim DeRuyter, who's now the head coach there, and they obviously shared the Mountain West Championship out there in that conference. So they're a really good football team. This will be, SMU has faced some pretty good quarterbacks this year, along with Nick Florence down at Baylor, and of course Johnny Manziel at Texas A&M. But June actually said the other day that he thinks that Carr is right in that league. Now, he might have been saying that for public consumption, but I also think that there is a little bit of truth on that. If you look at Derek Carr's numbers, he's thrown for 3,700 yards and 36 touchdowns, and he's only thrown 5 interceptions, so he takes care of the football. I think the one thing that the Mustangs are going to have to do in that ball game is that they're going to have to force some turnovers, because that's the way they've kind of made their living. If you look at the Houston game and the Stephen F. Austin game, where they forced, I think, a combined 17 turnovers in that game or whatever, or between those 2 games, that's how they win. And they had a plus 13 in the turnover ratio this year. Excuse me. And so that's how they're going to have to do it. And then they're just going to have Garrett Gilbert just be efficient, not make a lot of mistakes. And somebody on that receiving corps for SMU is going to have to step up and make a charge. It's going to have to be Darius Johnson, who's really had a disappointing season. So that's how I think. I mean, I still think Fresno State will win the game. But I think the Mustangs, if they're going to have a chance, they're going to have to force some turnovers and get some plays in the passing game, because Fresno State's going to line up at the box and go after Zach Line.
Okay. All right. Bridgepoint Education Holiday Bowl on the 27th. UCLA is a 1-point favorite over Baylor right now. What do you think?
It could be the most fun bowl game to watch this bowl season. And I think it has a chance to maybe mirror what Baylor did last year, I should say, in the Alamo Bowl when it played Washington. A lot of fun in that bowl game. You look at Baylor's offense, which is #1 in the country. And the one thing about Baylor's team, as we've talked about before, Bryan, is the fact that their running game really took off in November. The emergence of Lake Seastrunk really made a difference in terms of just how effective that offense became. UCLA, obviously, the great job that Jim Mora Jr. did out there in order to revitalize that program, pump some energy in it. They've got a great recruiting class going on right now there. But, the thing I like about it is that Brett Hundley, who's this freshman quarterback for the Bruins, has really become a dangerous dual threat. He's pretty efficient with the football. He's completing about 68% of his passes. Baylor's defense has had some problems this year, as we've chronicled throughout the season. They got a little better in the second half of the year, especially as we get in November, that November turnaround. So it's going to come down to turnovers from either side. I think Baylor can win this game, excuse me, even though UCLA is the is considered the favorite and basically the home team in this game.
Sure. Okay, Meineke Car Care Bowl, that's Meineke Car Care of Texas Bowl, I should say. And you got Texas Tech with the coaching shake-up there with a 13-point favorite over Minnesota. Your favorite team, I know. So what do you think happens in this game?
It could be absolute a woodshed game for the Gophers. Texas Tech, I think if Tech had made a hire that had not galvanized the fan base like the Cliff Kingsbury hire has, I think there would have been still a lot of turmoil, though. But I think the Kingsbury factor, even though the Cliff won't coach in the game, but he'll be there, of course, I think that really kind of gives Tech some energy. I think Seth Deggy wants to go out on a good note, too. He's had a good career run, even though the last couple of years have been pretty rocky with Tommy Tuberville. But he's a good quarterback. I think Tech needs to run the ball a little bit better. They've really slowed down doing that. Minnesota's offense is one of the worst in the country. I think they were like in the one teams. There's 120 schools that play Division I college football, and Minnesota was about 111, I think, in total offense, about 300 yards a game plus. They really got shut down offensively about the last 2 or 3 games of the year. I think if Tech doesn't cover this, cover that point spread, that would be news to me. I think Texas Tech will win this game pretty easily.
Okay, I'm going to skip over to the Valero Alamo Bowl. Oregon State at 9-3 is a 2-point favorite over Texas 8-4 this year. What do you think?
I think Oregon State will win this game. I know that David Ash has been tapped as the starter quarterback for the bowl game, which is probably the right thing to do. He's gotten back from his injuries, obviously, that he suffered in the TCU game when he had the cracked ribs and so forth. I think what's going to be interesting, though, about this game is how Texas responds to this, probably in the first quarter. It's been a real turbulent season for them, of course. I think everyone thought that they were going to be going to the Cotton Bowl until Northern Illinois changed everything, and then Oklahoma got bumped down to the Cotton Bowl. And I think that Texas is just going to have to come out and want to play well. Maybe there's a chip on their shoulder. Maybe they've used this month to kind of regather themselves and say, we're better than this, and we can play better than this, and we need to play better. But, Oregon State, even though they're way up in the Pacific Northwest, I think a lot of people don't give Mike Riley a lot of credit. He's managed the season with 2 quarterbacks who have had some injury issues there between Sean Mannion and Cody Vaz, who have done a great job of throwing the football. And Mannion's had a little bit of an interception problem this year, but it'll be a little bit of a homecoming, too, for Storm Woods, the Oregon State running back. He's a kid from Pflugerville. That a lot of teams, when he was going through his recruitment a couple of years ago, I just couldn't understand why a lot of teams from Texas really weren't locking in on him and showing a great interest. And it just didn't make any sense to me. But he's had a pretty good season. Now, he hasn't rushed for 1,000 yards, but he's averaging about 5 yards a carry. He does score a lot of touchdowns for him. I mean, they use him in a lot of different ways. I mean, he has over 300 yards receiving this year. And so, I mean, he's a pretty multi-dimensional running back, and he's done exactly what the coaching staff up at OSU has asked for. I think Oregon State will win the game, and I think they can win it pretty easy, especially if Texas is not mentally ready to go.
You surprised Manny Diaz didn't move on?
Oh, I don't know how to take those coaching searches can always take a different turn. You don't know what the other side is thinking when they're going through this interviewing process. I mean, I'd heard, for instance, with the Purdue coaching search that Butch Jones, who eventually wound up going to Tennessee, when he came down there to interview, for some reason the Purdue administration never even offered him the contract, even though there were reports that he did. So you just don't know what they're thinking. Either because the fact that Texas's defense was so up and down, and of course it all falls at his feet. Maybe that's something that kind of stuck in their craw. They talk about the hot coaches or the hot coordinators, so many being great coaching candidates, Bryan. He wasn't one of those this year, and that might have been just one of the things that impacted the decision.
Well, I'm wondering if Mac Brown didn't just take him off to the side and say, "Hey, listen, if you get a job offer, you might want to consider taking it."
Well, I think that there's just a lot of speculation about what Mac should do with that coaching staff, and that there's got to be changes. Obviously, they have to reform the offense now since Bryan Harsin left to go to Arkansas State. But really, I sometimes tend to think there's a lot of good coaches. These guys wouldn't have gotten to this level of football, Bryan, if they didn't know what they were doing and how to teach technique and how to game plan properly and so forth. There's just the weird thing about football is that when you get into a bad momentum swing or a positive momentum swing, it just snowballs, and sometimes it just sits there for the entire season, and no one can understand why. I mean, we have seen changes over the course of a year where a football team was playing bad at one point and all of a sudden has found its feet and kind of changed its fortunes. And as we've mentioned, Baylor is one of those programs that did that. But sometimes those teams can get stuck in a rut, too, for reasons they only know.
Okay, we'll move on to the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl and the Heart of Dallas Bowl. Both teams, TCU and Oklahoma State, both at 7-5, taking on 6-6 teams from the Big Ten. And it would seem like these are like no-win situation kind of games for TCU and Oklahoma State, because if they lose, it really looks bad. If they win, it's against 6-6 ball clubs. Take that TCU-Michigan State game first.
Well, I think that's going to be the better game, and I think it has a chance to be a real defensive struggle. I mean, Michigan State, that record that Michigan State has, Bryan, is a little bit deceptive. It is what it is, as Bill Parcells likes to say. But, the Spartans' 5 conference losses in the Big Ten this year were like by a total of 13 points. LaVon Bell's a great running back. So, I mean, the Spartans are a good team, and they've just had some bad breaks go against them. But they found a way to get to a bowl game. TCU, the weird thing about the Horned Frogs this year is that, they were great on the road in the Big 12 when they went 4-1, but they really had a tough time at home when they lost all 4 of their conference games. I think this really has a chance to be a pretty good football game. I think it can go either way. I think it really kind of depends on how well Trevon Boykin, TCU's quarterback, plays in the game. He's had a couple weeks to develop. And, the weird thing about these bowl games, though, Bryan, is the fact that TCU last played on December 1st, which is about 3 weeks ago from tomorrow. It'll be 4 weeks when they play. And then Michigan State finished its season on November 24th. So it'll be basically a good month plus since the Spartans have played. So sometimes you can see 2 different teams out there than what you saw from September through November. I do anticipate this to be a pretty good defensive football game. I kind of like the Spartans in this just for some reason. I don't know why. It's just kind of one of those things that just kind of gets to you, because I'm not there yet with Trevon Boykin. I think if he has, he can play really well. He has the ability to play well, but he also has the ability to make the mistake that makes you scratch your head. So, but I kind of lean toward Michigan State. Now, as for Oklahoma State and Purdue in the Heart of Dallas Bowl, it's going to be really interesting to see where the Oklahoma State family is in this ball for this game, because of obviously the trials and tribulations that Mike Gundy went through when he was flirting with the Arkansas and Tennessee jobs, and where that all came about. Obviously, the wound seemed to be everything seems to be smoothed over now, but it was kind of difficult and painful there for the first half of December. I think Mike's done a great job coaching the team, especially again since he's had to go through 3 different quarterbacks to run the offense. Purdue, obviously, they made a coaching change there. I don't think the Boilermakers are going to give Oklahoma State too much of a fight because I think because the Cowboys just have too much firepower, and I just don't think Purdue's going to have an answer, especially if it's going to be Clint Shelf or if it's going to be J.W. Walsh or whoever's going to be playing quarterback for Oklahoma State. You tie him together along with Joseph Randall, the great running back for the Cowboys. I just don't think Purdue is going to be able to match up and handle that very well.
Okay, how about the Fiesta Bowl? You got Oregon by 9 over Kansas State in that game on January 3rd.
That's probably an appropriate point spread, and that's probably an appropriate way to look at this game, that Oregon should be favored in this game. I mean, the Ducks are just explosive. They move so fast. And really, Oregon kind of reminds you of what Baylor does, or vice versa, where Baylor's pace really, really bothered Kansas State. And Kansas State, they turned the ball over in that game against Baylor, got way behind, and they just could never catch up. And that's the problem for Kansas State, is that if they play an up-tempo team like Oregon, and if they make some mistakes early and fall behind by maybe 14-0 or something like that. 10-0 you can still deal with, but if they fall behind like 14-0, it's going to be interesting to see how that team reacts, because they're not a great come-from-behind team, and they're going to have to show a little bit of moxie on that. They have to really keep this game close. They have to try and keep this game at least in the 30s. If they can try and keep it in the 20s, that would be even more beneficial for them. But this is where Colin Klein, who, again, was not very good at Baylor and was pretty average against Texas, and thus that's why he finished a distant third in the Heisman voting. I think that's where it's going to come down to, that Kansas State has got to make sure that it doesn't turn the ball over and make sure that it can at least try and keep a lot of things in front of Oregon, because if Oregon jumps out on them really quick, it's going to be a long night for the Wildcats.
And finally, we got the Cotton Bowl. A&M's a 4.5-point favorite over Oklahoma right now.
Wow. Great matchup, isn't it? I mean, you've got two 10-2 teams, and of course, everyone was saying this should be a BCS game, but we'll deal with that another time. But the tickets are. I think the Cotton Bowl's already sold out. Yep. The media credential requests were was probably as big as the Cotton Bowl officials have ever seen in recent years, just because of Johnny Manziel and the Heisman Trophy winner come into town. The Aggies are a really hot team. It's obviously it's a former Big 12 matchup when the Sooners and the Aggies got together. Although I'm sure some of the Aggies still want a little bit of a payback of 77-0 from a few years ago. And I think, and this is another chance for Landry Jones to kind of silence his critics too. Even though he's had the great numbers throughout his career and throughout this season, there's still that cast of doubters on him that still look at him and say, why does he make that play? He just makes these dumb plays all the time and that sort of thing. And all Landry's done is won a conference championship, shared a conference championship, taken a team to a bowl game. They won 10 games this year. So it's really kind of hard to, argue with his credentials, even though there's that it factor that he's lacking. But, I think it'll be interesting to see how Landry plays against the A&M defense.
It's going to be a fun football game. I'm really looking forward to that one. The only one I'm looking forward to more, of course, is LSU Clemson, but that's just me. So okay. Hey,
Battle of the Death Valleys and the Battle of the Tigers.
Exactly,
right?
That's right. And we're and the battle of who can drink the most. And LSU's got that one won hands down. So
they normally do, don't they?
Yes, pretty much. Much. I agree with that completely. Hey, Kevin, thank you very much for coming on with us. We hope you have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we look forward to talking to you down the line, buddy.
Likewise, and you all have a great holiday season yourselves, Bryan. Thanks so much.
Good talking to you. Kevin Lonnquist, the Big 12 Insider from Rattle and Hum Sports on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.